Welcome on in, everyone. This is the All Aussie Rules podcast. This is episode 45. This is our round 20 of the AFL season review episode. We'll be running through all 9 matches from round 20, do a review of them, as we always do on our review episodes. Then we will have a look at how my tips went for the weekend, and we'll have a look at what is to come. Before we jump into the first match of the weekend, though, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe wherever you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify. I appreciate you, and all the interactions help. Also, don't forget to check out all the social medias: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of the above. Plenty of content all over the place. So let's jump straight into first match. And it was Carlton Port Adelaide at Marvel Stadium on a Friday night. Important game for both teams, and look, it looked at halftime that Carlton were going to be the winners here, but Port Adelaide came back, fought hard, and got the win in the end by 14 points. A weird sort of game. Carlton only kicked 9 goals for the match, and seven of those came in the second quarter. So they kicked 1 in the first, 7 in the second, 1 in the third, and 0 in the fourth. So a weird sort of game by Carlton. I don't know what to say about that. Whereas Port Adelaide, they started okay. Their second quarter was a little bit average. They didn't quite keep up with Carlton, but then they came out after half time and just narrowed the margin a bit in that third quarter, and then narrowed it a bit more and took over in the fourth. Ended up walking away 14-point winners. What can you say about it other than they got the job done? Both teams inaccurate. Port Adelaide a lot more inaccurate than Carlton, so no excuses on that front for Carlton. Forward efficiency, Port Adelaide were very, very good. They got the ball forward a lot, and they managed to score quite a lot, which, I mean, that is Carlton's big issue, I guess, is they're not always the best defensive team. They actually kept Port Adelaide to 79, which, if you had told them at the start of the game that they were going to keep their opposition to 79, they'd probably take that most times because they concede more than that usually. But they just couldn't find a way to score, especially outside of the second quarter. They just could not find a way to score. Port Adelaide, as I said, plus 11 inside 50s, which isn't that surprising. They do play the territory battle very well most weeks, whereas Carlton use their forward efficiency, I guess, as a way to beat teams in the long run. Carlton's disposal efficiency was horrible, especially when you compare it to what Port Adelaide were managing to do, so that usually doesn't help. Port Adelaide were getting first hands on the ball, clearance differential plus 10. Carlton did win contested footy, as we kind of pointed out last week was probably going to be the case. But uncontested football did go to Port Adelaide. Tackling was massively in Port Adelaide's favour, which isn't that much of a surprise. They tend to win that area of the game most weeks. And the turnover game was won by Carlton here by 8, which both teams usually pretty similar, so a good result in that regard from Carlton, but they just couldn't really make use of it. We'll have a look at the two teams, I guess, a little bit more in depth here. It means now that Carlton have lost 3 of their last 4 games. GWS by 2 goals, Bulldogs by 14 points, and Port Adelaide by 14 points, with a win over North Melbourne in the middle. So their form certainly isn't looking great at the moment. If you're a Carlton supporter, it's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just, not the ideal form. Let's be honest. And I guess a lot of that comes down to third quarters are not great for them. They've been smacked a fair bit in third quarters lately. And even fourth quarters, if you go back about 6 weeks, they were the most dominant fourth quarter team in the league. They were scoring massively, like 5, 6, 7, 8 goals consistently in the final quarter. But over the last 3 weeks, they've only managed 4 goals in three final quarters. So they're really struggling in that area. They're not getting their hands on the footy as much as usual either. Like, they're down from averaging above 350, well over 350 over the last 4 weeks. That's a lot lower. It's down at 336, whereas they probably typically are about 370. So a bit of a drop in disposals lately. They're just not getting the hands on the ball. They're not getting the ball forward. 4 weeks in a row, they've lost the inside 50 count. They're just getting beaten all around the ground at the moment. It's not the end of the world for them. They've obviously got plenty of wins. So they're at a stage at least where they can, if they can reset. They've got Collingwood this week. They get a big win over Collingwood this weekend, and all of a sudden things are rosy again for them. Port Adelaide, things for them are the exact opposite. They've now won 4 of their last 5, with their only loss being Gold Coast on the Gold Coast. So not too bad there. Granted, 2 of those wins were St Kilda and Richmond, although St Kilda showed this weekend that they still have a little bit to give. But they did beat Port Adelaide by Port Adelaide. They beat the Bulldogs by 48 points, and now they beat Carlton by 14 in Melbourne. So their form is starting to lift, and they're starting to show some good signs. So they'll be reasonably confident that they can put in a good performance towards the end of this season. They're the reverse of Carlton, really. Their average disposals is well up over the last month of football, and it's really showing good signs, I guess. Inside 50 count, they're winning that most weeks. They've won it 4 out of the last 5. Clearance game is going really well for them. Uncontested footy, they're getting plenty of that. As been the case for all year, they're doing really well in the tackle count. This week they did lose the turnover game, but they'd won it the 3 weeks before that, which is a little bit against the grain for them. They tend to lose it more than they win it. But Port Adelaide, what's that mean for the rest of the season for both of these teams? I'm not too sure. Carlton, obviously, they dropped from 2nd down to 4th. Only half a game off 2nd, though, let's be honest. It's not the end of the world, but they do need to find some form. In what's even more surprising is they're only a game inside the 8 at the moment, really. Hawthorn are 9th, and they're a game and percentage, but still a game and percentage behind them. There's every possibility that if they don't turn their season around soon, Carlton could be dropping out of the not just the top 4, but the top 8, which is wild to say. But there's not much difference between 2nd and 9th, especially, but 2nd and 12th is very congested at the moment. Port Adelaide, this puts them still in 7th, which is a little bit unfortunate for them. They've already got 12 wins on the season. Most years you're probably thinking that that's enough to almost play finals, and there's still 4 weeks to go. So I don't think it's going to be enough this year. They have a massive game next week in Adelaide against Sydney. If they win that, then it makes their season look even better. But you're almost going to need 14 wins this season, which is wild. I was thinking 13 would be what you needed to get into finals, which means only Sydney have got there so far. But it might be 14. It could be 14 that you need. I guess we'll see, but it depends what happens in some of these games. What happens, I guess, with the Essendon, Melbourne, Collingwood over the next 2 weeks is huge. If those 3 teams continually lose, then it will be obviously a lot less wins needed, because the teams that are trying to push into the 8. Obviously, Hawthorn Bulldogs. Hawthorn's 11 wins, 8 losses, and not in the 8 at the moment, which is crazy. So yeah, big few weeks coming up for Port Adelaide and for Carlton as well. Saturday afternoon football, we had Kangaroos Geelong. No surprises here. Geelong got the job done quite, I won't say super comfortably, but comfortably enough. They won it by 40 points. They never looked like losing this one. Accuracy was high for both teams. Forward efficiency was pretty solid for Geelong. Their defensive efficiency was very, very good. They won the inside 50s by 9, which for them is pretty good. But then again, North Melbourne are not a team that defends the territory battle too well. Other than that, Kangaroos did really well in clearances. But once again, Geelong aren't a clearance team, so nothing to worry about there for them. Contested footy went to Kangaroos. They don't win that too often, so that's a little bit of a surprise. And they also dominated uncontested football, which Geelong aren't good at, to be fair, but they did completely control the possession of the game for most of it, North Melbourne, but they didn't turn it into too much positivity in terms of scoring and whatnot. Geelong get the comfortable win by 40 points. Having a look at what this means for both teams. Geelong, they've won 4 or 5, so they had that real rough patch where they lost, 6 out of 7 games, and it looked like their season was over. Since then, they've won 4 out of 5. They've beaten Essendon, they've beaten Hawthorn, they've beaten Collingwood, they've beaten North Melbourne now. Their one loss was last week against the Bulldogs, which was in the wet, so you can kind of forgive it, but it wasn't a great performance from them. Any stats from this match that go against what we kind of expected? Not particularly. I don't think so. At least they tend to play a very scattered game in a lot of stat categories. They lose clearances pretty much every week, as I said. They've won clearances 4 times this year, so it's not a concern that they lose clearances here. They lose contested footy regularly. They had been doing okay again in the little patch between Essendon, Hawthorn, Collingwood at winning uncontested footy, but the last 2 weeks they've been smacked in that, and that doesn't mean whether they win or lose games, because they got smacked in uncontested footy against Carlton. They beat them. They've beaten North Melbourne when losing uncontested footy, so no issue there. They're just flying. North Melbourne, their season has certainly improved since the bye. They've won 2 out of now 8 games, which still isn't great, but it is an improved performance on their first half of the season. They also lost 2 games by less than a kick, which were the Collingwood and Melbourne games. They had 17-point loss to Bulldogs, 19-point loss to Carlton, and even this 40-point loss to Geelong are all better than pretty much any performance they put in the first half of the season. So they're certainly looking better, but they're still a little bit off moving ahead of other teams in terms of progressing above that bottom 3. Massive couple of weeks coming up for the bottom 3 teams. Next week, North Melbourne, Richmond play each other. You think the loser of that probably is going to win the wooden spoon, probably. But North Melbourne also have a game against West Coast, I think. I don't know if Richmond play West Coast, but so there's plenty of opportunities here for North Melbourne to get, I guess, above West Coast even. They can't obviously catch Adelaide. They're going to be one of the bottom 3 teams. It just is a matter of whereabouts exactly. Geelong, this puts them 6th on the ladder. Similar spot to Port Adelaide, same amount of wins, slightly above them on percentage. They have Adelaide next week, which will be in Melbourne, I believe. So a good chance, I guess, there. Adelaide didn't have a good weekend this weekend, so a good chance there for Geelong to really push their case. That would, if they won that one, would get them to 13 wins with 3 games to go, and all of a sudden, top 4's not out of the question. They're only out of the top 4 at the moment on percentage, so a really good back half of the season here, and they could be finishing top 4. There's no doubt about that. Next game up was the Q Clash. It was on the Gold Coast, and for the first time this year, Gold Coast have lost a home game. They lost it by 28 points. They were in it, not convincingly in it, but they were in it most of the way through this. Brisbane turned it on in that last, mainly quarter, but last half of the last quarter, they really kicked away a little bit to win by 28 points. Both teams kicked poorly at goal. Brisbane's forward efficiency was really good. Well, both teams their forward efficiency was good. It was just Brisbane's was better than Gold Coast. Inside 50s went the way of Brisbane comfortably, which on the Gold Coast is a little bit of a surprise. Gold Coast tend to dominate that area in home games, but Brisbane, they dominate territory most weeks. So they did well there. They dominated clearances, plus 12. which they are the better clearance team out of these two. Typically, contested footy went massively the way of Brisbane, as did uncontested football. I know Gold Coast number there says that they average minus 3.2, but in home games it's a lot higher than that. They're definitely in the positives usually. This one might blow that out of the water though. Tackles went the way of Gold Coast, but nothing too exciting, and turnover game was very similar for both teams. Looking at where this was won and lost, I guess Gold Coast just failed to win a quarter for starters, so you're not going to win a match if you don't win any of the quarters. So not ideal there. They got smacked overall in disposals, and that's 4 weeks in a row now that they've lost the disposal count, which isn't the end of the world, but up until that point they'd been pretty good, in fact averaging 8 disposals more than their opposition per game, whereas the last 4 weeks they're averaging minus 67. So they did win one of those 4, which was the Port Adelaide game, but the other 3 they've lost against North Melbourne, GWS and Brisbane. So it is a pretty big concern over the last month. They're just not winning enough of the football compared to what they were doing previously. As always, their forward efficiency isn't great. To be honest, it's one of the lower ranked in the league, and it's slightly improved here, but not good enough to really write home about it. Was their best return in that regard since the Collingwood win in round 16. Overall, though, you can't say too many positives about Gold Coast's performance here and what we kind of expect for the rest of the season, because that now puts them even further behind the 8 ball. The thing was, if they won all their home games, they're going to finish 11 and 12. And now that they've lost a home game, that takes them down to 10. In a season where you're going to need what? 13, maybe 14. They're going to have to win every game from here, obviously, to make finals. But even then, I don't think they can. It's possible. They've got West Coast next week, so it's not completely out of the realms of possibility, but it's going to be a struggle. Meanwhile, Brisbane, whoo-wee, are they flying? Since the bye, they haven't lost a game. That's 8 in a row now for them that they've won. And they do it on the back of dominating first quarters, really. Well, not so much dominating. They do sort of dominate them. They've 8-0 in first quarters since the bye. And they don't always smash the opposition. Like this one, they only won by the first quarter by 2 points. But they're still winning the first quarter every week by an average of 13 points per first quarter. So they're a very good first quarter team. And they just kind of carry it on from there and hold on. Well, not so much hold on, but just continue it on for the game. Inside 50 count, as all season long, they've been dominating that, and that hasn't changed in the last 8 weeks or this week. They're just a team that is getting it done at the moment, and at the moment, you'd have to say they're almost premiership favourites. Sydney have been faltering. Brisbane have been just steadily going about their business and sneaking up on the ladder, and now all of a sudden they're sitting second on the ladder. They're 1.5 games behind Sydney, so it's not out of the realms of possibility that they pass Sydney on the ladder. It would have been against 1 billion to 1 almost 10 weeks ago to think that Brisbane would be catching Sydney and potentially have a chance at passing them. It's a bit of work to go to get there, but it's a crazy thing that what is happening in this season. It's just tightening up even further. So they're cruising. They've got St Kilda next week. Big game for them. Brisbane get the win there, then that would seal them in the finals. They're probably sealed in the finals as is, but that would almost 100% guarantee them final spot, and it would give them a very, very good chance of finishing top 4, maybe top 2. Huge chance for them next week. Meanwhile, Gold Coast, as I said, they've got West Coast. You'd expect them to win it. But you can't guarantee that the way they play away games. So I don't know what to make of that for them. You'd have to say, well, you'd have to put them down for a win. But even if they win that, they would have to win every game from here, increase their percentage a little bit if they were any chance of making their first finals appearance, and I just don't see it happening now. While possible, very, very unlikely. Next up, we had St Kilda Essendon at Marvel Stadium. Big game for mainly Essendon, but St Kilda get the win by a comfortable 53 points. Who saw that coming? I mean, I didn't predict that St Kilda would win it, but I thought they might have given them a little bit of a shake, but I certainly didn't expect a 53-point domination. First half was pretty close. There was a period there in the second quarter where Essendon hit the front. But then from then on, it was just one-way traffic. 10 goals 4 for St Kilda in the second half to Essendon's 3 goals 2. And it was just done on the back of good accuracy, good efficiency. That forward efficiency number for St Kilda was massive. So 65%, or more than 65% of the time they went forward, they managed to have a shot at goal, which is a really good result. In fact, 65.1% is their best result this season. Their previous best was 63.6, which was in round 1 against Geelong. And since, other than that, they haven't got above 53%. So, a huge, huge result in their just ability to score when going forward. And it has kind of been Essendon's issue most of the season. Not just their defensive efficiency, but also their forward efficiency. Essendon just really struggle. They dominate the territory battle. I mean, they didn't dominate it this game, but they won it inside 50s by 3. And they lost the game by 53 points. And it's purely just on the fact that they just are really struggling to convert their opportunities going forward into good shots, and then, just good opportunities, I guess, that create an opportunity to score a goal. They've been really poor over the last, mainly the whole season if you look at it as a whole, but other than the game against Collingwood where they really blew it out of the water, Essendon have been below 50% pretty much consistently all year. Certainly, since round 5, they've only gone above 50% twice, and that was once against West Coast, which West Coast aren't the best defensive team, and once against Collingwood. So it is a genuine problem that Essendon have, is their ability to have a good forward efficiency and make use of their inside 50 domination, because they do tend to dominate the inside 50s most weeks. So much so that since round 6, they've only lost the inside 50 count once, and they did win that game. That was against West Coast. So they make of that what you will, but they're a team that in that period since round 6 have had 9.6 inside 50s more than their opposition per game, and lately they just have not been converting any of them into wins. Yeah, they did for a little bit. At the start of that run, they were 5 wins and a draw from the first 6, but since then they've only won 2 out of their last 8 games. Sorry, that was me doing math in my brain. So, and one of them was West Coast. So they've only had 1 good win in the last 8 matches, and that was against Collingwood. So what's that mean? They've lost 2 weeks in a row to teams that aren't going to be playing finals in Adelaide and St Kilda. The week before that, they lost to Melbourne, who maybe play finals, but certainly aren't in the 8 at the moment, and probably won't be in the 8 come the end of the year. So there could be 3 non-finalist teams in a row that they've lost to, and if you want to play finals football, you just can't be doing that, really. So that kind of tells us where they're at the moment. St Kilda, obviously, I said it at mid-season when they had their bye. I did a mid-season review of all teams, and I said that St Kilda are probably going to be kicking themselves that they let themselves down so much early season. The fact that they only had 5 wins up until the bye was going to be costly, because after the bye they only left Marvel Stadium once for the rest of the season. That was to Adelaide, which they lost in the wet. But they've beaten Sydney, they've beaten West Coast, and now they've beaten Essendon in the last 5 games. So they're 3-2, which, granted, is still probably not perfect. But if they had have got an extra couple wins, whether it's the Essendon game in round 3 or the Geelong game in round 1, they gave up a really good fight in that one. Port Adelaide over in Adelaide Oval, they were close. Hawthorn down in Tassie, they lost by 5 points. They win some of those, all of a sudden they would be right in contention with the top 8. They would have, because they're on 7 wins as it is. No, they're not. Sorry, they're on 8 wins now. So if they were on even 2 more wins, maybe 3 more wins, 10 or 11 wins right now, they're on the brink of the 8. So they will certainly be kicking themselves that they let themselves down so much early season. Next week is a tough one though. They've got Brisbane Lions up at the Gabba. So you'd have to think the Lions will beat them there, but who knows. Meanwhile, the Bombers, they have a must-win game. It's Fremantle in Melbourne. Typically, you'd say Essendon win it. At the moment, first thoughts after this round is they're not winning it. If they play like they did on the weekend, they're not winning it. It's as simple as that. Fremantle have been known to not be the greatest travelling team. However, this year, they've been pretty good. They won their first 3 games in Melbourne this year. I don't know what they've done recently. Hang on, let me just double check that. So they beat North Melbourne their first game in Melbourne. Then they beat Richmond, so the bottom 2 teams. Then they beat St Kilda, who's also not in the 8. So they won their first 3. They then lost their 4th one, which was the Bulldogs. So the 3 of 4 in Melbourne. So I wouldn't write Fremantle off just because it's an away game in Melbourne. However, Essendon, they'll be coming out fired up. They have to. They have to show something this weekend. You'd have to think they have to show something. Their season's done if they lose it, surely. They've got 2 tough games to finish the year. It's hard to see them being making finals if they lose against Fremantle in Melbourne. Saturday night football, we had Melbourne, as we're talking about Melbourne, GWS, Melbourne GWS at the MCG. Melbourne got out of the blocks. They were 35-8 at quarter time. Kind of fell apart a little bit for them. GWS took the lead. Not that the scoreline quarter by quarter there looks like it, but GWS had a comfortable lead midway through even late in the 4th quarter. And then Melbourne kicked the last 3, I think, to get back within 2 points. Nearly stole it, but not quite. Massive result for both teams, really. Cements GWS in that top 8 battle. It doesn't guarantee them top 8, but it certainly gives them a good chance. Whereas Melbourne, it has them still outside of the 8, looking in and making it harder and harder by the week. Where this game was won, lost, both teams really struggled efficiency-wise forward, which meant that defensive efficiency was very high for both teams. What to make of it? Inside 50s went the way of GWS. Nothing too exciting there. I mean, both teams are usually pretty bad in the territory battle, but one of the teams has to win it, I guess. Clearances, another area that neither of these 2 teams are great at. GWS won that area in this one. Contested footy went the way of GWS. Uncontested footy, not surprisingly, because Melbourne tend to get beaten in that area most weeks, but went heavily the way of GWS. They also tackled better, but the turnover game went the way of Melbourne. What's that mean? What do we make of this game? I don't know, really. It was a weird game. Melbourne had their chances in the end and didn't get it done. 2 weeks ago, they beat Essendon to revamp their season. I guess they had a little bad period mid-season just before their bye where they lost 4 out of 5. And it was like, oh, geez, that's the end of them. They came out of the bye and winning 3 of the first 4, including a big win, as I said, against Essendon. And it looked like, oh, maybe their season's still alive. But 2 losses in a row. Granted, one was Fremantle over in the West, so it wasn't an easy one. And then now this one against GWS at home kind of makes it difficult for them to play finals. It has them, they're a game and percentage out of the 8. It's not the end of the world for them. Obviously, if they can string a few wins together, they would probably, just like Collingwood, will have to win 3 out of 4, but pretty much you'd think have to win 4 out of 4 if they want to play finals. And they play the Doggies this weekend, so another team that is right on the brink. So the winner of that is hugely advantaged, whereas the loser just falls back a little bit. Bulldogs have that massive percentage, so that's kind of in the Bulldogs' favour at the moment. GWS, this puts them 5th on the ladder and only slight percentage behind Carlton in 4th. All of a sudden, there's a chance that they can finish top 4 again, which is crazy. We wouldn't have seen that coming over they've had a weird sort of season where they show signs. They started really well, obviously. They won their first 5, won 6 of their first 7 when they beat Brisbane in round 7 by 54 points. Then they only managed to win 2 out of their next 8 games. So they had a really rough middle season. Even either side of the bye, they were struggling. They lost by 27 points to Sydney. Then the week after, in round 16, they lost by 16 points to Adelaide. And you're thinking at that point that was season over for GWS. But then things kind of turned around for them out of nowhere. They beat Carlton by 12 points when they were 6 goals down at one point. They then beat Richmond, which, let's be honest, they should have done. Then they beat Gold Coast by 39 points, and now they beat Melbourne by 2 points in Melbourne. All of a sudden, top 4's a realistic chance for GWS. They have some big games coming up, including this weekend. They have Hawthorn up as a home game for GWS. They obviously lost by 6 points last time they met Hawthorn, so it is a huge game for them. If they win it, top 4 is still a chance. If they lose it, Hawthorn are probably a top 8 team, and GWS are right on that cusp again. So it's very tight still. The next 2 weeks is going to be huge for where teams finish. Next up was the other Saturday night game. This was the Western Derby, and it was a little bit of a concern for Fremantle. I thought we were going to have a similar result to what we had last time these two teams met, where West Coast just controlled the game and won by 35 points, I think. But Fremantle, I guess, just before halftime, kicked a goal right on halftime, which got them within 13 points. And then from then on, it was just one-way traffic. Eagles didn't kick a goal in the third quarter and only managed 2 in the last. Fremantle ended up winning comfortably. Their forward efficiency is what did it for them here. They were obviously winning the inside 50s as well, plus 8, but their ability to create shots from forward 50 entries was huge. At 60%, that's a really good number. West Coast defensive efficiency is, I think, the worst in the league, off the top of my head, and it's only getting worse after this game. That was domination in that facet. Clearances went the way of Fremantle, however, a massive result from West Coast to equal, to run even in centre clearances against Fremantle, who are the best centre clearance team in the game by a long way. Contested footy and uncontested footy was both dominated by Fremantle. No surprises there. Tackles went the way of Freo as well, and they even won the turnover game, which is not something that they do too often. But if there was a team that they are going to do it against, it's probably the West Coast Eagles. So Freo, they're flying. They've won 5 out of 6 and 5 out of 7 since the bye. You take out those 3 losses in a row that they had early season in rounds 4, 5, 6, sorry. Their season's looking really, really good. They've had 2 bad results, maybe 3 bad results for the year. So they had the 37-point loss to West Coast in round 6. They had the 48-point loss to Sydney in round 9, which is a total forgive. I just ignore the fact that game happened. They kicked really poorly in front of goal, and obviously there was a lot happening that day for the Freo players, so we just ignore that. And they had their 67-point loss to the Bulldogs. You take out those couple, and their season is really, really good. I've been on their bandwagon a little bit for probably like the last 4 or 5 weeks since... I'm not 100% sure since what game it was, but maybe it was the Gold Coast win. I think it might have been the Melbourne one when they beat Melbourne by 92 points in Alice Springs, because it just showed that they can offensively be very, very good, and in fact that's kind of been the situation for them since then. So up until that point they were averaging, so the first 11 games, averaging 76 points per game, whereas since then they're averaging 101.5 over the last however many games that is, 8 games. Granted, they lost 2 of those, but 6-2 with an average score of 101.5 is as good as anybody is in the competition right now. So Freo, what they're doing at the moment is huge. Ever since that game where they finally showed that they can attack, they'd only made 100 points twice in the first 11 games. They've made it 4 times since. So they are doing very well. West Coast, they're limping towards the end of the season, aren't they? They showed up this week. They showed up 2 weeks ago against Brisbane. But since the bye, they've been very average. Their game against Essendon was okay. They got smacked by the Hawks. They got smacked by the Demons. They were okay, as I said, against Brisbane. They got smacked by St Kilda, and then they were okay here for at least the first half. But it wasn't great. They've only managed to win 2 quarters total in the last 5 weeks, so it's not a great result, really. Not when they're back to kind of the way they were playing in the first 3 rounds. They had a good little period there from like rounds 4 to probably like 11. They showed some positivity and some decent signs, but it's been a long time since their last win, which was round 10. And I would normally say it's hard to see them winning a game, but they have some opportunities coming up, because this week's probably not a good sign of that. They've got Gold Coast though in a home game for the Eagles, so Gold Coast haven't won an away game yet. They've lost to North Melbourne as an away game, so maybe West Coast can come into this. If they play like they did in the first half against Fremantle for the full game, they should be able to win. Will they be able to do that? We will wait and see. Meanwhile, Fremantle, they play Essendon in Melbourne, as we kind of mentioned before when we were talking about Essendon. It's not against out of the realms of possibility that they win this one. A win would likely keep them in 3rd, because I think Brisbane are going to beat St Kilda, but it would probably seal a final spot for them, which I don't see them missing out on finals, but would really put them in a good spot for a top 4 finish, especially if Carlton or GWS or both lose this weekend. So some positive signs coming for Fremantle, I think, at least. We move on to Sunday football. yesterday if you're watching this when I goes live, but for me this was only a few hours ago. It's currently 7 hours ago this game started, and while not wholly convincing, Collingwood got the job done by 36 points. They were kind of in control of the game the whole way. Richmond kicked a couple goals late, winning the last quarter, but overall Collingwood looked the winner most of the way. Richmond hurt themselves with their accuracy in front of goal. Granted, a lot of those were tough shots, but still, it is what it is. Collingwood's defensive efficiency was really bad here, / Richmond's forward efficiency, which Collingwood are usually good in that area. Kind of good, not outstanding, but pretty solid. So this was a bad result in that regard, and forward efficiency for Collingwood was solid, around about their average. Inside 50 differential went the way of Richmond by 1, which was a little bit surprising, but not all that surprising because Collingwood have been atrocious at that lately. Clearances went the way of Collingwood. Richmond are not a great clearance team. Contested footy went the way of Collingwood, which they'll be happy with. Uncontested footy went the way of Richmond, which they don't win it very often, but neither do Collingwood. So I don't think Collingwood were too worried about losing uncontested footy. They tend to do that regularly, especially lately. Tackles, as always, Collingwood dominated that facet of the game. And in a little bit of a worrying sign, Collingwood couldn't win the turnover game again, which is starting to happen regularly. It was probably their best area of their game up until the bye, and then since the bye they've now lost that area of the game 4 out of 5 times, whereas so before the bye they were plus 3.9 intercepts to turnovers. Since the bye they're going to be minus 5.8, so that's like a 9 possession turnaround, which is quite a massive difference, and not at all surprising why they've only won 1 game since the bye. Yeah, I don't know. Their season's not over. They're struggling, but it's not done. They did what they technically needed to here, which was beat Richmond. They play Carlton this weekend. If they win that, then all of a sudden people will be like, oh, well, they're a finals team again, I guess. But we'll see what happens. It's a lot of work for them to do to make finals. They probably, in all likelihood, have to win all 4, but maybe 3 wins might sneak them in. Might. I don't think it will, but it might happen, depending on other results. And it's not easy because they play 3 of the current top 4 teams again. So they've got Carlton, Sydney, and Brisbane. So if they're going to make finals, they're going to have to do it the hard way. But we'll see what happens, I guess, for them. For Richmond, their season is petering towards the end. They've only got a few games left. 4 games left. They'll be counting them down. They got North Melbourne this week. If they don't want to finish on the wooden spoon, they need to win this week. Pretty simple. They have shown some positive signs, I guess, off and on lately, but it's still not great. Since the bye, they've played 5 games and they've only won 2 quarters, and they've both been 4th quarters when the games were already over. So, not fully over, but far enough over. So they were 31 points down against GWS when they won the last quarter there, and then they were 41 points down today when going into the 4th quarter against Collingwood. So, and if you go back to the game before the bye, they didn't win a quarter in that match either. So they've only won 2 quarters in the last 6 matches. While not looking as bad as they did in that period from round 7 to round 10, it's still not looking great for them, is it? So they're counting down to the end of the year. They've got a big game against North Melbourne. See how that goes for them. As to whether they're going to be wooden spooners or not, I guess. While it won't guarantee the wooden spoon, the loser of that is certainly very likely to get the wooden spoon. Next up was Sydney Bulldogs. Sydney continued their bad run. Didn't start this game well. They lost the first quarter, which is becoming a bit of a trend for the Swans. They've lost 4 out of the last 5 first quarters. No, that's wrong. They've lost... I've lost the plot there. They've lost only 3 out of the last 5. But their first quarter's clearly their worst quarter. So they average minus 4 points per quarter in the first quarter, whereas every other quarter, second quarter they're plus 14, third quarter they're plus 12, final quarter they're plus 5. So they're very good throughout the game, except they're just slow starters. And once again, this was probably the breaking point for them. It's going to catch up to them eventually, I guess, and here it was again. So 3 out of their last 5, they've been smacked in first quarters. They lost the first quarter against Fremantle by 27. They lost that game. They lost the first quarter against Brisbane by 22. They lost that game. And now they've lost the first quarter to the Bulldogs by 34 points, and they've lost that game. So they've lost 4 out of their last 5. The only win was against the Kangaroos, and they only won that first quarter by 2 points and ended up winning the game by 79. So slow starts is costing them big time. I mean, they ended up losing by more than what they were at quarter time, but not by much. Granted, they kicked the last 3 goals of this match really late on, just to make it look like they actually scored relatively okay in this game. Otherwise, they would have been finishing on a 30 for the match if the game finished 5 minutes earlier. So, not a great result for them. However, for the Bulldogs, this is absolutely massive. Great game from them. Plus 14 inside 50s, plus 12 clearances, plus 27 contested football. Really, really high forward efficiency. Really, really good defensive efficiency. Everything about this game was Bulldogs football. This is what they show us they're capable of time and time again, and they just don't tend to do it often enough. However, they are starting to show it right now. So since the bye, they've won 4 out of 5, including the week before the bye where they beat Fremantle by 67. They've won 5 out of 6, and they're finally breaking into the 8. It's just so tight in that finals race, but they've beaten the last 3 weeks. They've beaten Carlton, Geelong, Sydney. Carlton at the time was second on the ladder. When they met Sydney, they were top of the ladder, still are top of the ladder. And Geelong are, I think, last week going into the game, they were like 5th, maybe, off the top of my head, but somewhere around about just outside the top 4. So they've beaten 3 very high-placed teams in a row, and 2 of them convincingly, 47 points to Geelong and 39 to Sydney. And Carlton was a 14-point win, so certainly not too bad. And Fremantle, just before the bye, are sitting 3rd on the ladder now. So, and they beat them by 67. So they show such good signs. But their last 2 losses were a 43-point loss to Brisbane in Melbourne and a 48-point loss to Port Adelaide in Adelaide. So they just have these losses that just make you believe that they're not good. But then they will pepper that with 3 really good wins in a row. So it's kind of been the Bulldogs of the last, I'd say, 3 years. Ever since they made the grand final, after that, they've been a very inconsistent team. And they do it time and time again. Like, it's hard to know where they are. Because even at the start of the season, they got smacked by Melbourne week 1. Then they went and smacked Gold Coast, West Coast. Just lost to Geelong in a very, very entertaining game in Gather Round. Then they got smacked a little bit around by Essendon. It was only 29 points, but it felt like they were not in that game, certainly in the second half. Then they won by 60 points against St Kilda. Then they lost to Freo, lost to Hawthorn. And I was like, what is going on? So they'd lost 4 out of 5, but their win was a 60-point win. So it's it's really hard to know what's going on with the Bulldogs. But this win puts them in the 8, only on percentage, but puts them in the 8, and less than a game behind Carlton. A win, well, exactly 1 win, but they've got better percentage than Carlton. In fact, they have better percentage than anyone that they will likely end on the same points as, because they're 3 wins behind Sydney, so they're kind of irrelevant in the Bulldogs' run home, you'd think. Brisbane Fremantle obviously have a draw, so they're not going to finish on the same score. And both of those are similar percentage. Everyone else is a fair way behind them in percentage. So if the Bulldogs keep winning, they could sneak into the top 4. It's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. Big game for them this weekend. They play the Demons. In what will be, if they win it, they're a chance for top 4 still. If they lose it, they're probably not going to finish top 4. They still could finish top 8, but they're not going to finish top 4. Sydney, they're still top of the ladder. They're still a game and a half clear, but now they go to Port Adelaide for a massive game against them. And all of a sudden, they might not be finishing top of the ladder. It's not the end of the world for them. I've been thinking about this a lot today because I was watching them play and I was like, what's this mean for them? You'd rather have your form slump now than in a month's time. There's no doubt about it. Every team this year, last year, has little dips in form where they have a stretch of 4 or 5 weeks where they don't win many games. This is theirs. It's not the end of the world. They just need to find a way to find their form again, and that probably starts with first quarters. They just need to find a way to come out of games, hit the ground running, and win that first quarter. If they come out next week and win the first quarter by 3 goals, it'll be smooth sailing for them again. You look at Collingwood last year, they lost 3 out of their last 5 games going into finals. It's a positive for them, I think, really, Sydney here. They have still 4 games to re-evaluate, reassess, get their form going again, and hit the finals running. There's no way. It is possible, I know, that they don't finish top, and it's possible that they don't finish top 2. It's probably even possible, technically, for them to not finish top 4. But, in all honesty, they're going to finish top 2, you'd think. So they're going to have a home final. So they just need to find a way to get their form, get their confidence, and hit the ground running into finals. It's basically where they are at. Final game of the round, and it was Adelaide Hawthorn, Adelaide Oval, Sunday evening football. And it started looking like a cracker of a game. Adelaide played really well in that first quarter. Probably should have been further ahead than just 1 goal. Hawthorn kicked straight. Adelaide didn't. But after quarter time, she was all one-way traffic. Adelaide managed just 3 goals for in the final 3 quarters, whereas Hawthorn in that time kicked 14 goals 10. So it went from Adelaide putting up a fight, looking like they were right in the game, to Hawthorn winning comfortably very quickly. It doesn't mean much for Adelaide's season. Their season's done. It puts them below St Kilda, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It probably works out better for them to finish below them. Whereas Hawthorn, it means a lot for their season. Wasn't enough to put them into the final top 8 because the Bulldogs got the win against Sydney, but it puts them into 9th. It puts their confidence, their form, everything into a really good spot. Plus 17 inside 50s, really accurate in front of goal, really good forward efficiency. Defensive efficiency was very solid. Disposal efficiency was really good compared to Adelaide's. They lost clearances, but not too stressed about that. They won centre clearances, though, by plus 6. Contested footy, they lost that, which I was a little bit surprised about because they're usually a better contested football team than Adelaide are, at least. But they did dominate uncontested footy again this week, so 2 weeks in a row that's happened. It's just Hawthorn are flying. There's no 2 ways about it. And all of a sudden, you have to say that they are in the top 3 or 4 form teams of the competition. There's no doubt about it. They lost their first 5 games of the year and 6 of their first 7. And at that point, they were getting smacked. They'd beaten North Melbourne. And other than that, everything had been pretty much a drubbing. So they'd got within 5 points of Collingwood. But since that point, though, since the Sydney loss by 76 points in Melbourne, they've only lost 2 games since then. One of them, the Geelong game where they got smacked by 51 points, was a little bit of a concern 4 weeks ago. But then, since then, they've turned it around. They've beaten Fremantle down in Tassie. They beat Collingwood by 66 points. And now they've beaten Adelaide by 66 points. Things are only looking good for Hawthorn right now. It's unbelievable that they've won 8 of their last 9 and they're not in finals at the moment. And if you go even further back, they've won 11. Is that 11? Yeah, 11 out of their last 14 games, and they're not in the top 8. It's wild. Not that surprising when they lost their first 5 games, but when they were 0-5, the odds of them making the finals were pretty much done. And yet, here they are. Here they are. Sitting 9th on the ladder, just percentage behind 8th. And if they keep winning, they're going to be playing finals. There's no doubt about it. They can probably play finals winning 2 games, maybe. 3 wins would almost guarantee them finals, I think. They've got GWS next weekend in what is a massive game up in Sydney. They beat GWS down in Launceston about 6 weeks or so ago, however many weeks ago it was, maybe a little bit longer. But if they can beat GWS, lock them into finals. Whereas if they lose it, it just makes it a little bit concerning again for them, because there's plenty of teams around them sniffing for that final spot. Big football. So yeah, that's that. Oh, we better talk about Adelaide. Not that there's much to say. They're sitting 15th on the ladder now, half a game behind St Kilda. What's that mean? Not much. It's probably where they finish. They're going to finish 14th, 15th guaranteed. I would say probably at this point they're going to finish 15th. St Kilda are playing better football than Adelaide at the moment, I think, even though Adelaide beat them a couple of weeks ago. It was in the wet over in Adelaide. They play Geelong next week. You'd have to think Geelong beat them, based on what we've seen over the last month or so of football. That is all 9 matches. We'll check out how my tips went, but before we do that, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. This podcast comes out twice a week on Spotify and YouTube. It comes out Monday mornings, Mondays I should say, but usually Monday mornings, unless Sunday's been chaotic and I haven't got the podcast recorded. And the second one comes out Friday morning, which is a preview of the upcoming round. So make sure you come back, check them out, Spotify, YouTube, twice a week for those, and also all the social medias. And like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of my content, of your team's chances going into finals. Technically, there's 15 teams that can still win the premiership. In all honesty, there's 12 teams that can still play finals. It's probably going to be tough for Melbourne, Collingwood to make finals, but not out of the realms of possibility. My tips for the weekend, it wasn't the most outstanding week. There was a few upsets. We went 5 of 9. So first off, we got that game wrong, Carlton, Port Adelaide. I said Carlton by 25. Once I did the numbers, I actually had Carlton by, I think, 3 points. But both were wrong. Port Adelaide won it. Then Geelong won comfortably enough against North Melbourne. Brisbane got the job done against Gold Coast. St Kilda ruined me tipping again, beating Essendon. Melbourne lost to GWS, so I got that one wrong, but wasn't far off. Only a kick basically off the correct margin. Fremantle took care of West Coast pretty easily in the end, about that margin. Collingwood did beat Richmond by a very similar to that margin. Sydney let me down. Bulldogs beat them. And then Hawthorn got the job done in the final game of the round to give me 5 out of 9. Dropped me to 111 out of 171, which was a slight dip, but it's okay. It's okay. We've had a few good weeks lately, so this one's not too bad. Yeah, that's the end of this episode. thanks for tuning in. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, especially to the YouTube channel. There's going to be plenty of content this week. I've got 2 videos planned. One of them for you Hawthorn supporters to come back and check that out later this week. And the other one for anyone that's in the top 12 teams on the ladder. We're going to do a run home video and check out what every team has run in the run home in the final 4 weeks and see what your chances are of each of those teams making the finals. So make sure you come back, check all of that out. Thanks for tuning in. This has been the All Aussie Rules Footy Podcast. This is episode 45, the round 20 AFL review for season 2024. Thank you and good night.